Hello, everyone. That's being recorded. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first annual MDS Cybersecurity Techxpo. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who was able to join today. My name is Jara Gruen, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Marine Data Systems. Part of my focus in starting at MDS about 2 years ago was around all the major compliance regulations that have gone into effect the last few years, specifically GDPR and DFS. With the onset of digital transformation, ensuring an organization's IT infrastructure is not only secure and streamlined, but also fully compliant is a daily, weekly, and yearly task. And that's why the focus of this year's Techxpo is on data governance and regulatory compliance. MDS is committed to developing IT solutions for our customers, where their offering is broken down into 4 pillars: infrastructure, productivity and applications, identity and security, and managed services. We are not limited to one type of product or solution, but will rather customize our offerings according to an organization's specific needs. One aspect of MDS I find particularly unique is our focus to not only implement, but to educate customers on the many types of technologies currently on the market, which brings me to why we're all here today. I'd like to thank our platinum sponsorships, Microsoft, Cisco, and Darktrace, which you saw outside, I'm sure, and our gold sponsors, Armor, Sophos, and Zix, for participating in today's Techxpo. Each of these partners are here to also better educate and speak toward their specific ways their solutions can be leveraged to ensure your organization is effectively governed with its organizational data while also remaining secure and compliant. After our panelist discussion, which goes until around 3:30ish, 3:45, we'll be hearing from Darktrace and Microsoft. Then we'll open the floor for the Techxpo where you can mingle, grab a bite, and just speak to our sponsors. So with that, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists who are here today, right over here. Andre Moore, VP of Corporate Audit, Global Technology and Operations at Bank of America. Dauna Williams, Esquire, Head of Technology, Privacy, and Intellectual Property at BurgherGray, and Edward Chang, Senior Manager of IS Operations at Phibro Animal Health Corporation. Welcome, panelists, and thank you for being here. And Jason Rebar, Senior Engineer at MDS. Take it away.
Thank you, Jara. As Jara mentioned, the focus for our panelist discussion today will be on data governance and regulatory compliance. As you can see by the slide, we have 3 individuals up here from various backgrounds who have helped not only their own organizations and customers on their journey towards compliance, but also have experience forming data governance frameworks. Thanks again for the 3 of you for being here. Let's get started. Organizations looking to implement a data governance framework will face and a need to address certain challenges along their way. What are some of the challenges that you've seen, and if you can recall, how were those addressed? Andre, let's start with you.
From my perspective, I think the political challenge is always a big one, especially with large organizations having to build consensus among diverse business lines. You have compliance, for example, risk, legal, enterprise data management, technology, and it's a challenge, of course, to build that consensus in order to get to the future state, of course, which will include compliance with regulation. Another pain point that I've seen too as well is actually finding the data, right? Because in this world that we are 80% of the data we consume is unstructured, it's almost like finding a needle in a haystack. And so those are the 2 challenges that I see. The political leadership that's required to get the program in place and operational. And then from a technical perspective, finding the actual data elements that contain personally identifiable information that you need to secure.
Yeah, it's certainly been a challenge, I know, for many of our customers to get the various groups in line and a top-down strategy coming from senior management to stress how important this effort would be for a number of different companies. Dauna, perhaps you could provide some of the legal challenges that you've come across as well.
Yes, it's actually, it's many times very challenging from a legal perspective, and there are many reasons for that. The two that I want to highlight are, one, legal as a department is not necessarily riddled with people who actually are comfortable around technology. And then the flip side of it is that technologists actually is not riddled with people who are comfortable with law, or lawyers. And so what you find is that there's a lot of planning that has to happen with these two groups coming together and working as partners. And Andre and I were talking a little before, and he mentioned a very important point, which is the communication and speaking from the same playbook. We do not use the same language, and so it's just and oftentimes the times that these two teams, as well as all the other teams, all the stakeholders within your organization, have to come together, it's always under stress. Right, it's either to get ready for a new reg or there's been a breach, and then usually under these stress moments is when everyone finds out, oh my gosh, I didn't involve the other one, either side, in the conversation around how we're managing legal risk here, and enough, or two, I also don't even understand what they're saying. So it's so that's from a legal perspective. I think precaution. I know I'm making a lot of whistling sounds here, but I think an ounce of prevention really is worth a pound of cure in this situation.
Thank you. Ed, anything you'd like to add to that?
I agree wholeheartedly with Andre and Dauna that you need that executive sponsorship from above. At the same time, you need to have that common language and transparency between legal, IT, and the business, so they understand that we're all working towards a common goal. Mooring Data System actually were very integral in kind of breaking all that down to help facilitate legal to understand IT language and IT to understand legal language. Okay, we're both working in the same effort to get the project done. However, we have our day job too, and because we have our day job, things get put on the back burner. We had to get things executed by the May 25th date, and it was a very probably a 3 to 6 month project that was condensed into about a 6-week effort to meet that. So you can just imagine all the individuals involved, not just Mooring Data System, our IT folks, the business and legal. Everybody's like pulling their hairs out, and we're working with Irish Legal Counsel. So there's multiple avenues that have to be kind of just put together to achieve GDPR compliance.
It's very true. You touched on something that I think is also a big factor for a lot of organizations looking to meet any regulatory compliance, which is who's driving this effort as well. I don't know if there's any strong thoughts on this end, if there's any one group within an organization, whether it be legal, whether it be IT, or yet another specialty group, or is it simply a group effort to make sure that this is followed up on while people do have their day jobs, to make sure that things are maintained moving forward, and that organizations that do get compliant stay compliant? Any thoughts on that, on who should be leading that charge or driving that effort forward?
Well, if we are talking about GDPR, that's the reason we're here today. I think the law, the regulation is quite explicit. There's a data protection officer that needs to be identified and appointed in order to lead that effort. And some organizations have different names for the same role, a chief data officer, for example, that will be responsible for the compliance efforts. But ultimately, the accountability goes down the chain, right? So there are going to be data stewards that are embedded with a business organization and helping the business to understand how to comply with the reg. And then there are ultimately the data owners, the folks that own the data, and that govern what should be accessed and what shouldn't be accessed. So I think that the entire organization, there's a hierarchy or structure that needs to be put in place of accountability and responsibility. Again, that guidance is also given in the regulation.
One of the things that I would add to that is that, especially with GDPR, but I think now that others are coming down the pike, such as California and Colorado, is that, and then also the historical stuff that's there from, SOX and HIPAA and all the others, is that the realm of what is private is kind of, I think there's too many mics up here. I think that's the problem. Yeah, I think that I'm just a little over my head. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to turn this off.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, my voice carries. But one of the things that you also have to keep in mind is the fact that the realm of what is privacy has basically been established at this point. Different regs may have thrown a different nuance and things that sort. Like if you're looking at California's Consumer Protection Act came out, they focus on something called households as well as individuals. But then when you break it down, what is household information but a bunch of individuals? So it's a nuance that actually, in the end, privacy is, I think we've defined it. So that's one thing. So these new regs keep coming up and popping up, and the old ones there. At this point, we all know kind of, when you're talking about privacy, you're talking about a bucket that basically carries almost all the same things, no matter which regulatory system you're in. But on the flip side of that, though, is how you decide you're going to integrate and which nuances within each of those different schemas are you going to highlight, something you're going to pull back on because the risk doesn't really apply to your business. All of those things are part of a risk management analysis, and there's a legal component to that as well as also other risk management. And that's where the work needs to be done today for any sophisticated organization. It's not so much saying, how am I going to be compliant with GDPR versus how am I going to be compliant with DFS versus HIPAA? Because you're basically, in the end, the Venn diagram is just getting to be a big circle. It's not really a Venn diagram anymore, right? But the issue is how you're going to be compliant based upon what am I going to emphasize or de-emphasize within all those different regulatory systems does require that a lawyer be around. And so, from my end, you're going to help us out here? Yeah. So that's what I would say is kind of the starting point, is really making certain that you have in the room to work with your team or lawyers who are going to be able to do that analysis. Whether or not they're capable of doing that analysis is a different story for a different, maybe for later on in the panel. But to me, that's kind of a key component that's a little different than how we've approached these regs in the past. Just one other thing that I want to say, because historically, the way that if you look back on how organizations dealt with HIPAA, how they dealt with SOX, how they dealt with all of these, back in the day, these same regs that actually dealt with privacy and cybersecurity, is that they went to the technology department first. Because going back to what I said earlier, you have a legal department filled with folks who don't really feel comfortable around technology. And you had, at that time in particular, organizations who would not really give much budget for this kind of compliance, and just kind of voices on the tech department said, you handle it. Make this happen, make it go away. Tech did the best they could. They would bring in the lawyers, they would bring in the compliance officers as necessary. But it wasn't as though anybody from the very top just celebrated and said, oh, let's give you cash to be able to bring in all these people, educate everybody, get everybody on the same page. So the point that I'm making is that I think that, and maybe it's just because I'm a lawyer, but maybe it's also because I've been doing this for so long, is that the missing element in these early stages is making certain that you bring in your legal team to figure out exactly what this technology, how is this technology going to impact how our trading floor works, how we build this particular widget. How is it going to impact if we ever have a litigation, because of a breach? What tools do the lawyers need to be able to protect us post-breach? All those questions need to be answered and analyzed based upon these regs at this point. It's not necessarily how do I get compliant with California versus GDPR, because it's kind of that game's kind of over at this point.
Question: how have you found bringing legal up to speed, especially in the, I'd say, the last few years, they've changed quite a bit with all the digital transformation. Both, number one, it's a digital transformation portfolio, so that just means a lot of moving pieces. But it's an accelerating version of it, right? It's using all these cloud-native platforms, not just big ones, but dozens of special industry ones and so on, which, like at a macro level, really push everything down to the DevOps level or to the kind of, it's called the power tech user level, and then maybe the power business user community, right? I mean, the goal is to kind of push everything to those two populations. Those are really advanced people to work with on a daily basis. How have you found bringing legal up to some kind of clearinghouse level?
Right.
Because that's what I found is that even when you bring that team in, it's trying to explain what a code pipeline is or what a data pipeline is. I mean, it just doesn't really translate. It's like them trying to explain some complicated trade agreement to me. I mean, it's just gibberish, Is that a fair question?
No, it's a very fair question. You're hitting the nail straight on the head. And basically, the ABA has recently, in the last 4 years, mandated that all lawyers have be technically educated, or they could be disbarred. It is deemed now to be it's unethical for a lawyer to practice law today in 26 states, and New York is one of them, without a full understanding of technology. And that also means how technology impacts how they run their businesses as well as their clients. Now, the reason why that was made so stringent is because of the fact that lawyers are woefully behind the curve. And in my experience, actually, it's the way that lawyers are trained. And I don't want to talk too much about this, but we can talk about it offline. But the thing is that you have to find a really savvy technology lawyer. Means either they grew up in a place like a Google, or they've either come through a strong side on the patent side of things, so they understand the technology, and then on top of it also understand the regs that are the technology influences. And when I say the regs, I don't mean necessarily the privacy laws, but I mean like things like the laws that are going to impact the widget that's being built, the platform that's being built.
Licensing and PLIS and all that.
Exactly, and not only and that's contractual side of it, but I'm talking about like regulatory, like the SEC, like or the FTC, like what are the regs underneath the technology? What is the technology trying to solve? And then, one of the things that's very interesting, and I'll shut up, is that like with Bitcoin, and ICOs and the like, is sort of like a group of regulators right now are calling it currency. Another group of regulators are calling it securities. It's just sort of like, well, why are they splitting hairs like this? Why don't they understand? Why can't they come up with a decision? It's because of the fact that a lot of times they don't understand the technology. You know what I mean? So it's just sort of like, so it becomes what they see and understand. And so, anyways, but that's what I'm talking about. It's got to be that level of granularity where lawyers are really getting their hands dirty and saying, all right, I may be an SEC lawyer, but I understand blockchain, that kind of thing. So, I'm sorry, Mom.
No, good point, Don. Thank you.
I think Dauna touched on a lot of items. You're talking about, there's Andre mentioned, transparency and working in concert with not just the business, but legal and IT. You have to almost put it in terms of layman terms for them. Even though there's technology, as you were mentioning out there, that's getting confusing, you're going to have to leverage what you guys know as an organization. You have institutional knowledge. What are we utilizing? How does that apply to us? And you have to work with, not only the business but legal to explain this is how it impacts us. We're using this Internet of Things in our warehouse, okay? And can that be breached? You explain those terms, they're going to understand. Oh, okay. There's a fault. There's a risk there. They understand that. So I think that's having a partner bridge some of that, not just working internally. You can leverage that to kind of break down the wall.
You mentioned it a few. Go ahead, Andre.
There's one additional point that I want to add. If there's anything you take away from today's session is this, that if you have an effective data governance program, it's going to be agnostic to any other privacy regulation that is enacted. Because an effective data governance program has all of the necessary controls in order to comply with most privacy regulations. So the goal really is to focus on developing an effective data governance program. Compliance with the reg, even though I shouldn't probably say this, is secondary, but the important thing is once you have that effective data governance program in place, whether it's a GDPR, whether it's the California Consumer Privacy Act, whether it's Australia Privacy Act, or the Canadian anti-spam law, or the Chinese Cybersecurity law, or the Russian Data Privacy Act, it doesn't matter because you've already invested in developing an effective data governance program, and it doesn't matter whatever new reg or privacy reg is enacted. Secondly, I know this was always a pain point for me too as well, and I identify the difference between privacy and security, because I get confused sometimes too. I think a quick way to really differentiate the two terms is privacy is really focused on controlling authorized access, right? So you have authorized users that need to access data, and least privilege applies, and that's what privacy is about. It's about usage of data, right? On the other hand, security is concerned about preventing unauthorized access. So privacy is about controlling authorized access, and security is about preventing unauthorized access. So I mean, they're very, very similar, but obviously the GDPR is concerned with privacy. So we have a population of folks who are allowed to access this information, but in a controlled manner. So I just want to make sure I share those two thoughts with you today, so that at least if we have any further discussions about privacy and security, you know the distinct difference.
Thank you. That's very helpful. The regulation that we have named a few times has been GDPR, and it's certainly, I think, well known at this point the effect that it's had on companies around the world, whether they're based in Europe or not. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on whether or not the initiative to become GDPR compliant for US-based companies has been a good impetus to form a larger data governance strategy as opposed to just simply working to meet compliance.
I think it's a good overall because, setting a standard, and I believe it's going to occur at one time or another. That's why there's states, not just California, it's Colorado. Everybody is picking and choosing what information to protect. It's all data privacy protection, okay? I don't know if sometimes it's an effort to strike back at the large corporations or companies outside of our area, China or Europe, and city, state, local, they have their differences with these big companies, okay? And you just got to make sure it's being done for the right reason. It's being utilized to protect the people, or is it just another agenda behind there? And we don't necessarily have control of that, okay? So it's a good thing that it's occurring because we're behind. Everybody else is ahead. Germany kind of inflicted a lot of this stuff, okay? Their regulations, so much that Microsoft said, oh yeah, we'll just set an instance out there in Germany for you, specifically for you, okay? Because everything needs to be there. Data centers and information you do business there has to be there. okay? And it's a catch-22 because, you're using cloud services now. So organizations that don't meet, say, a 5,000 user or above are not allowed to have multi-tenant. They're not going to allow you just to have 10 people over there, okay? So they're going to change that. Google has no issue with that. Google has actually said, that's fine. It doesn't matter how many people you have. You can have your instance over there, okay? So everybody can have the same domain. You don't have to change anything. So, Microsoft's catching up. They're going to figure it out. So it's a good thing that's correct.
Great. Dauna, Andre, any other thoughts on that?
I would say that, as I said before, the definition of privacy is kind of solidifying and has been for a couple of decades. Europe has been leading the charge in that definition of what is privacy, what is private, and what should be held private. As Andres pointed out, the delineation between the two, between privacy and cybersecurity. But the thing that's also interesting with that is that, it's circular, right? You can't really, it's what are you going to emphasize first? You're going to emphasize the privacy, you're going to emphasize this, the security side of it, because GDPR is built on security principles. You cannot be compliant without being secure. So, and if you look at DFS in New York State is built on security principles, but at the same time, the things they're telling you have to keep private is to avoid a breach of those same privacy concerns elements. So it's circular, and it just depends upon which you're gonna emphasize more, as far as the regulatory schema is concerned. But as far as GDPR is concerned, it did force us to focus on the conversation a little more aggressively. It definitely did, but it didn't. But it's not to say that here in the U.S. we weren't talking about privacy because we had HIPAA, So it's not a foreign concept to Americans. It's just that we were focusing more on the security side of things as opposed to the privacy side.
How have you found your product teams are having to evolve? Because you build products, you can build products that are very data-driven in the United States one way, and then lots of other parts of the world in LATAM, Asia, very similar. But in Europe, it's obviously very different. And how have you found the governance process as you go through that with those teams? Because obviously, it's a financial background, and you're lots of different industries, so you're part here in healthcare. How have you seen that kind of evolve? Because I found that that's a really challenging thing, because one type of set of product is very monetizable in a certain way, and another part aren't. But then you try to make it up on a more subscription basis that allows you to leverage the data. So it's this kind of almost opt-in, know that customer kind of opt-in model versus here or in Asia or in LATAM where you just build the product. Does that make sense?
So talking a little bit to that, that would be like on May 25th, and it's relative because, I've spoken to Gartner and several other different analysts and vendors about, well, how are these GDPR regulators targeting companies, right? And unfortunately, they target the big American companies that has occurred, from Google to Facebook, and they got hit with billions of dollars in fines. They knew it was coming. It's not like they didn't. Okay, Microsoft, I'm sure too. But at the end of the day, they go, well, how do they look for them? Aside from people contacting them and saying, hey, there's a breach, all right? It's very simple. They don't go to the yellow pages and say, hey, look you up. They go to your website. They go, let's go to your website. Do they have any type of coverage? Do they have a privacy officer? Do they have any regulations? Do they have any cookie setting? Does it opt in to different features? Right, that's a red flag right there. There's nothing there. Then they're going to, and you're a big company, they're going to come after you. They say, yeah, you do business. You're a public company. You do business in Europe. Are you protecting everything? Okay. We want you to demonstrate, show us that you are executing. And that's the key thing, is being able to demonstrate it, and have that data governance, okay, be able to say, hey, look, I have policy procedures and everything put in place. I can show you.
Okay, we have no breaches, right? They say, okay, we'll leave you alone, go away. Okay, you have nothing in play. There's been some time. You're not working in good faith. They're going to hammer you. Okay, especially when you're a company making billions of dollars, they're going to keep spending on it. Okay, and probably have breaches. So you know, it's meant to be punitive. GDPR has been around for some time. It's just never been punitive to the degree it's 4% or 20 million euros, okay, whichever one's higher. Okay. That could hurt a company. Facebook's facing that right now.
I would add to that that, you know, when it comes to architectural solutions and figuring out exactly how am I going to design our next widget so that we can actually make money and not have these regs slow me down, right? Is that you know, there was a significant time period where businesses were able to build business models based upon the fact that the currency was really privacy, right? And you tell me something about yourself, and I'll give you this wonderful platform, and you get to play in it, you know, and I don't charge you for it. Now these regs are making you actually pay for some of that privacy, and I think that, quite frankly, it may be that we are going to end up finding that privacy is somehow commoditized and structured in some sort of token system through blockchain or something of that sort. You know, in other words, you know, I will give you credit for use of your privacy, but the bottom line is whatever your creative juices are, you need to make certain that. Again, you must say I hate lawyers, but you make sure that those lawyers are not saying, dude, you can't do this. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be that. It really should be about, and then I would emphasize the fact that you should be talking to a patent lawyer, because of the fact that one of the things about patent lawyers is that they're comfortable with technology and they understand that the technology can be built to design new opportunities to make new things, as opposed to now that these regs are in place, you can't make money anymore, right? So, so you're just going to have to be creative, get a creative lawyer by your side to allow for you to continue making, you know, widgets that are actually, or platforms that actually are advancing your, you know, allowing you to be to make something in a capitalist environment.
You mentioned opt-out. You know, one interesting thing about that is that Colorado actually states that they're enforcing it, that you should be able to still use services, whether it be Facebook or whatever, and opt out. Okay, so you shouldn't be declining to be able to use services. Aside from being paid, it's different. This is a free service. You should be able to opt out. So then that kind of limits your demographic a bit, but the technology is still utilized. So as long as I believe you're giving them that option to come out and say, I don't want you housing my data or keeping it, because how Colorado is written, it's very specific. They want the right to delete it, they want to know all that. So it's very similar to GDPR.
Yeah, I'm finding that it's very, going back to that old kind of great principle of locality, which is problematic when you're trying to build modern products in modern organizations, where you have to build a Colorado product, and then you basically sit there and then legal and so on, and say, well, you know, why don't we turn our sales office into a solution office, have, you know, X, Y, and Z virtually work there and show up or whatever, you know, those numbers, 31 days, 90, whatever those, plus 1 day, and that now becomes, you know, that governing product state, you know, a country, whatever. But that's incredibly challenging to try to develop and work in that environment, you know, just to get technology to work, because you're going to just branching, which actually exposes security and so on. So,
unfortunately, we've been targeted. Target, Home Depot, Facebook. You got these big organizations. What occurred? They had to send out credit stuff. They got, you know, like a little bit, but nothing to the degree that's perfect. So there's accountability installed. Basically, that helps drive you to even more so. target them. Okay, this make it kill them, and every time they don't comply, we're going to find them again, keep finding them. So that's the creative part. You're going to have to get creative and tactically any organization. Kind of go, give the options to everybody to opt out. It's free. Click on the button. That's done. It's kind of
I have a question. Is there any advantage about a company to say it's going to take me forever to comply to GDPR? It's a big effort. Yeah, that's the other. Does it make any sense? Less of a penalty, perhaps, if they started their journey to compliance with GDPR, the regulators come in and do it. Would there be consideration that maybe there's no answer to that. That's a regulator.
It would depend on the regulator. They do want
to make any sense to, even though it is a long journey,
they want to make sure you are, you have a plan to get there. You're not just paperwork. You're not just talking. If they come back in 6 months and you say, I'll be done in 6 months, then you're going to be penalized severely. They're not going to go, okay.
So you made it possible that you maybe penalize less by having a work in progress to become GDPR.
I think it's more time. You may have more time. So the example would be just like the regulation in Colorado has it that they have one of the stringent rules that you have to comply 30 days of requests from state. The data is either requested, it has to be answered at that time. Okay. GDPR allows you probably take extension of 60 days. Okay, like say. What's helpful, how the language is written very carefully is it's not so exhausting for the entire organization to take data. Someone needs data, you can look for it. The more they give you, the easier you can find the data. They say, hey, give me every single piece of communication I had from big data. Like, they said my time working there. That's not really practical. If you say it's a date, it's a time, it's a subject, yeah, you can build down, you can get that. There you go. Okay, but it's working towards compliance and being distributed. That demonstrates that you are doing something. Okay, so I can't answer you if you line question more. Let me give you more time. Okay, when you're done with 12 months, we'll be back in 12 or 11.
Yeah, actually, the way it's structured GDPR is that they actually do specifically address that. They talk about how they are looking at that this is a journey, not as a destination, and that basically you're constantly in a mode of constant trying to get more effective compliance more and more. If you do get brought in by regulators, they actually look to see how your organization operates. In other words, are you sincerely trying but maybe overwhelmed? It's almost like a psychological analysis for an organization. Are you overwhelmed? Are you guys actually trying to cooperate with us? Are you rude to us? I mean, they go on and talk about that. It's sort of like if you're working with a regulator and you're saying, okay, dude, we just didn't know where to begin. We're 200 people. We didn't understand it. We just don't on the website. But we're trying. And then the next time they come back, as you said, the next time they come back, the next time you come back, if you show that you've actually made some progress and that you actually put together the right stakeholders, you can't drag your feet and try and game the system, but at the same time, if you're honestly trying, then they're going to take that into account as to whether or not you're compliant.
And it's also written in there that it's not, this regulation is not intended to bankrupt the organization. Okay, so the example would be you're making $100,000 number. They don't theoretically expect you to spend $1 million securing and making it private, but they do expect you to take measures that are cost effective. So they say, hey, you're the person with the key, the whole organization, put it in a lockbox, only you have access to wherever it is. It's pretty damn secure. It's limited, secure. Okay, not everybody has access to it. you have some type of encryption lock or whatever it is. You're not spending a lot of money. You're doing what's necessary. But they can target anybody, but they're more than likely not going to target
Andre, I know we talked about a lot of things in that session. I don't know if you have any specific thoughts you'd like to add for any of that.
Okay.
Sure. Sorry, go ahead with the question.
So I'm just wondering if standard chunks SECs can be used in lieu of longitude third parties. You guys see some of those service builders? Yeah, my question is on standard contractual policies. Okay. Between processors and providers. Have you guys seen companies use those kind of in lieu of, for example, small third parties?
Yes, actually, that used to be the standard. You know what I mean? Back when it was the 95 directive, that everyone was basically cutting and pasting straight out of the 95 directive and using that language. And then what happened was that, especially as with the cloud service provider, everyone started to, well, the service providers were obviously they made them controllers and processors. They actually, the history is that they started developing their own and using a link, and then you guys had basically approach, standardization went away, but and became more complicated, but it actually more self-serving to those individuals who are actually creating their own special language. But the reality is that the standard language is actually the basis for all of it. So that as long as you're adhering to what is required from a regulatory perspective, you don't have to do anything more than that. The problem is that lawyers step in, again, I love my government, but lawyers do step in and sometimes say, okay, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to get extra unilateral protection for my clients. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. I do it all the time for my clients. I mean, take advantage of it. But the reality is not necessarily.
Okay. Good stuff. I know at the end of September, the European Data Protection Board met at a conference to talk about, among other things, establishing standards within GDPR, whether it be for the high-risk activities that would initiate data protection impact assessment. And we've talked a little bit about the commonalities and differences between GDPR as well as California's new Privacy Act and Colorado's. Do you think that with all of this effort to establish standards and guidelines, we'll eventually get to a space where there will be sort of a global privacy and data governance framework, or is it mainly going to be a matter of individual companies working to comply with smaller individual regulations themselves? Andre, let's start with you.
Yeah, I go back to the previous point I made before. If you have an effective data governance program, it's really agnostic to any other regulations that are laws that might be enacted by any country, because the output of an effective data governance program is data quality, and that's what a lot of these regulations are driving at. Making sure that the data that they store, that whether the data that's acquired, that's validated, that's stored, that's processed, that's protected and used, that these data are accurate and complete, and that of course is protected from unauthorized use as well. So again, to not to belabor the point, but again, an effective data governance program kind of protects you from any other law that might be enacted in the future, because you're doing the right thing. I think the GDPR really is helping us to formalize and operationalize something that we should have done long ago, right? It's not new. I mean, it's just wrapped in a different package, and it's called GDPR. But it's really best practices to how we manage data in our enterprise. From the time it comes in to our organization and is captured until it's disposed of and destroyed, along the data life cycle. It was something that we should have been done before, and it's a best practice. And I think I was mentioned by one of the panelists because it has punitive consequences. It's now a motivator. It's now obviously incentivizing us to do something about it. But this is not new stuff. So that's my that's my opinion.
Dauna, Edward, anything?
I agree wholeheartedly with what Andre just said. I mean, I can't stress it any more. As an organization, that is the best way to combat all of these breaks that are going to continue to come down the pipe. To your point about whether or not will it become a global standard, I think that there already is one, as I mentioned before, with the circle, Venn diagram becoming basically a circle already. But with that said, there are a number of treaties that are legal treaties in other areas of the law, such as like copyright, patent. Yeah, but copyright in particular, trademark has an international standard, so that basically, like copyright in 178 countries, and copyright trademarks the same, that have set to certain global standards. And so that everyone has their own law base, their own rules, but allows for copyright and trademark to be done basically the same way around the world. And that's the same thing for, hopefully, that protection and privacy become fall into that same category.
So, again, I agree with Dauna and Andre, but, data governance and standardization, for the United States, it's almost like, we're staying above the bar, whether it be GDPR or whatever that compliance, data governance is key. But that's why, if you look, it's only really 3 states that have made some effort to data privacy. Okay, why is it being held up? It could be various reasons. Some of it in California, in Colorado, big companies, corporations like Google, which makes a lot of money off of data, Facebook, okay, they're pushing back. So, any of those states, it has to come from above. It has to come from the federal level of our government to basically say, here's a standard. Okay, if you don't have something, this is what the standard is for the remaining, 47 states. Okay, when is that going to happen? It's really based on our politicians and us pushing. So how important is it? How many breaches will occur before people say, I'm done? I want something done. I want protection. Okay, like the Europeans have. I mean, to a certain level, we're protected. We go to Europe, for instance. You go to Europe, you're staying there. You're vacationing for several weeks. You're covered under that GDPR due to the fact is you gave it to the hotel. The hotel's the only people that had your information. They had a breach. They're in trouble, even though you're not a European resident. You're there. You're covered. Okay, so they can't just do whatever they want with your information. So you don't have to necessarily just be a resident. You're there. Okay.
Another thing, one point I should add to as well. I've found in my practice that when companies begin to comply with one regulation, they begin to develop practices consistent with complying with that regulation, and they find it very inefficient to manage data differently. So I'm saying all that to say is that, even though GDPR is specific to European data subjects or citizens, and California is one of the first states to enact a privacy law, consumer privacy law, when companies begin to manage their data to comply with one reg, it typically has a cascading effect at all the other practices. So pretty much if another regulation is enacted, they're pretty much already practicing those having the effective controls in place in order to manage in compliance with that one initial reg that was enacted. So it usually have a cascading effect that it doesn't necessarily require all states to have laws that are specific to privacy, but when one state starts and have punitive measures and fines and penalties to penalize a company if they're not in compliance with a rule, that practice becomes it becomes a holistic practice across the organization, and as a consequence, it builds immunity from other rules and regulations that might be enacted in the future.
Yep, certainly seen it again with our MDS experience that many organizations that are approaching regulatory compliance or data governance for the first time may see it, in fact, as a burden to start out, but it does have many benefits once it has been put in place or the initial wheels start turning. You can see how it could benefit an organization moving forward, whether it's protections against additional acts that may be coming into play or other acts that they didn't know they were actually falling on. Some really good discussion. I know we wanted to open the floor. We've had a couple of different questions come up. I wanted to see if anyone else from the audience had a question. Michael Track, go ahead in the back.
So I agree with like the idea of getting in front of the problem and putting like these frameworks in place and getting people on board with that. The output of those is typically something a little bit amorphous for finance to understand, right? So we say, okay, well, we have this framework and we have this data governance policy or we have this data governance piece, but for them, it's not a tangible component. While it might have later objectives, such as, our data governance will put in place, this type of eventual technology to secure up this gap for where this technology can play a part. The deployment of the technology is a tangible outcome. The framework isn't. How do we justify that to the finance team so that we can front load the project to get them on board with a framework or with the idea of moving forward in this direction?
My first response is that it has to be a strategic imperative. Has to be. And one of the first steps at operationalizing any regulation is to get sponsorship from the executive team. That's the first, and that's the reason why I started off with it's a political challenge. You're trying to change behavior, and behavior is not easy to change, especially in an organization, right? So you need to have that buy-in, that consensus amongst the disparate stakeholders in order for them to be sold that this is something that we're in together. And if you don't cover that, or if you don't pass that first hurdle, you're going to set yourself up for failure. So it has to start with the CEO, for example, outlining that this is going to be a strategic imperative going forward. It has to have the appropriate stakeholders involved. There have to be accountability that's built into the specific roles that are assigned for oversight. And if you don't have that at the start, it's going to be a difficult path, if not an unsuccessful one. So that's my take.
Well, aren't you seeing that for now? I mean, the CEO's job is at stake on some of these breaches. Used to be the IT, the IT guy at the department, but today used to be the actual executives like CPOs being let go or being held accountable. So you have to get that. I agree with you. You have to get that executive sponsorship. Any of this will work.
I mean, just like GDPR, thank you. Just as like GDPR was put the impetus into, all right, there's a fine now, you made the punitive as you mentioned. GFS has now done the same thing for board accountability. And so it's just a matter of time where, you don't have to fight for that political currency, which has been traditional for decades now, actually, having to put in that fight, and usually not getting it, actually. Bravo to the technology department that has accomplished a lot without much mandate or financing to do it. But with DFS, the board has to, sign off. And a lot of them are funneling through the DFS process, given the fact that they are, financial services and insurance. So, but.
Yeah, so Michael, even to answer the point, I agree with Andre and Dauna in regards to, having that executive sponsorship, that strategic vision with accountability. However, if you want to kind of, for more of the public sector, okay, how you kind of explain it a little bit more that finance understands very clearly, you talk SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley to them, okay? That is the process. Stuff has to occur. Frameworks have to be put in play. It's not just about technology. Technology is only one facet of it. Policy, procedures, data governance, all those come into play, okay? And if you have that put in place, they understand that. That they understand. If you want to talk to them about that, we know SOX. Well, GDPR is no different. Data privacy, data governance, same idea. We're working towards security, privacy, make sure it melds together.
Any other questions from the audience? No? Okay, some really good discussion today. Please join me one last time. Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
But I guess, wouldn't you then say that over the years, when it comes to information, the tail has been wagging the dog, where most organizations see information ownership as something that belonged to IT, and most organizations just did not want to deal with it. That was a taboo. And now with all of these regulations that are coming into place, what they're basically now saying is the technology is really just a tool for what really is important. The organization's existence is really based on the information that it needs, that it uses to perform its mandate. And as a result of that, that is what the real asset is, and that is what needs to be protected, whether it's from privacy or from data security. When we start to look at all of these different frameworks, and I'll put that in quotes, we're just kind of now saying, governance is just basically another way of saying HR, you own HR information. Financials, you own financials information. Operations, etc. And this is actually now forcing the likes to go on into the executive management of those organizations. And it's saying, you're the ones who own the information. Your IT people are the ones who are just trying to keep the wheels on the wagon, but you're the ones who are legally accountable for this. And if I may, I guess that what I have found is, and maybe from the legal perspective, I would be curious to get your insight on this, is that I have also found a certain level of pushback from the legal community. Not because, at least from my experience, it wasn't necessarily because of their lack of technical knowledge, but what I found was, or at least this was my interpretation, that I was dealing with corporate lawyers. Corporate lawyers are not information data privacy lawyers. So they were the first ones to say, well, I'm not too sure I can answer this. Well, I need a legal stance because this is how I have to implement my controls. I need a legal stance as to what I need to do, because what we're talking about here is the legal stance. Once I have that, I know what I need to do. So I found that many lawyers are saying, well, you know what, let me get back to you because now when I have to consult with a data privacy lawyer, this is not my area of expertise. And finally, they said, this is not an area that I work in, that I specialize in. Let me go out and let me go search and sit down with someone who can provide me guidance.
Exactly the situation. I mean, lawyers are they're trained differently than scientists are. And so they really don't embrace technology. It's not in our comfort zone. And by way of example, when I was a junior lawyer, it was 1990, and I was at Merrill Lynch, and the fax machines had hit the trading floor. You know, it was a big new technology, the fax machine. Okay? And I did a number of things because I was a junior kid. I was given IT as one of my areas of responsibility, and IT, intellectual property. And everyone was like, I was getting calls from the trading floor. I was getting calls from, you know, all around this large institution saying, okay, Dauna, what do we do with this fax machine? What kind of disclaimers do we have to put on it? And my boss came up to me and said, we're general counsel decided we're going to make you the fax lawyer. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. It doesn't work like that. The trading floor has to figure out from a security regulation perspective what kind of disclaimers need to go on the bottom of their trades that are fax. And then the lawyers who are dealing with the investment management area the same. You know what I mean? It was just kind of like, let's back it up. But that is the initial reaction. It's just sort of like, and it's just the same way today, you know, and it's sort of like, wait a minute, I need to get somebody else to tell me how to handle it, as opposed to my learning, what does this technology mean for my practice area? And it's just a different mindset. Lawyers just don't think like that. They think that there's somebody else who can answer that for them. And quite frankly, the privacy office can't answer those questions for them if they're a trading floor lawyer. You know, it's just sort of, and that's the reason why I said, you know, if you're at a Microsoft, if you're at a Google, any of the partners here today will have lawyers who are much more in tune to the technology that are the business. But if you're in the business that doesn't build technology but build something else or sell something else, it's going to be hard to find out. But to your point, absolutely, it is a tail end.
So do you think that do these regulations, GDPR, all of these items, do they help with what is typically perceived as law firms and financial firms that are slow to adopt these technologies in general? Does this accelerate that?
Accelerate their own internal compliance?
Yeah, their internal usage, the quicker adoption of technology. They're approaching the law so that they're not scared the next time they have to walk up to the next new smart board that's going to be on the wall as opposed to the fax machine.
I would say that millennials are much more comfortable, you know, given the nature of how they grew up around technology. And so millennial lawyers tend to adapt more. But in my experience, and I manage the IT operations of my firm, we're only like 25, 30 people.
No.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like, it really depends.
Also, that's a Microsoft.
Yeah. But like I said, but Microsoft is going to be, you're going to find a completely different story because, and I've even sitting in on like Microsoft panels where I've seen other Microsoft lawyers talk. They talk about technology very differently than like my colleagues did you know, in the financial services industry. But you know, it depends upon your organization. Andre said that, you know, it's about, you know, the top down and the mindset and I think that sort of, because like by way of example, my firm does work for MasterCard and they say that they're a technology company and they have a panel discussion coming up where all their lawyers are coming in later this week and the entire agenda is digital. It's all about security and digital data protection and things of that sort. And we don't do that kind of work for them, actually. You know, it's actually, you do something completely different. But, you know, so all my colleagues are like, oh, wow, so you have to explain it to me. I'm like, no, you're going to have to learn this to be able to continue to give these services to access. So.
The other point I want to make, too, as well, is that, I mean, this is 2018, right? We're in the middle of the information economy, right? And if we are grappling with stuff like this right now, and we are at the advent of adoption of machine learning and artificial intelligence, we really have a way to go because we haven't reached a point where there's a level of complexity that we have to deal with. When you start injecting these machine learning and artificial intelligence technologies into the mix, then it's going to be a discussion at a very high level. and GDPR does address that too as well, because if you start using EU citizens' data to make automated decisions, you need to have what they call algorithmic explainability. The algorithm that's being used to process that data must be clearly explained how it came to that decision. So, for example, if you have an algorithm making a decision on whether a person qualifies for a credit card or mortgage loan, and that is being made by some sort of machine learning algorithm, and the EU subjects decided that they need to know the reason why they were denied by this algorithm. The law requires that there is some level of explanation that the company, the processor, not the business, is responsible for providing a reason why the algorithm made that decision. And when you start getting into these fancy algorithms like neural networks that we consider a black box that do not have any sort of way to explain how they work, then you start getting into all sorts of different problems. So, I mean, these are, again, obviously different, going off into a different tangent, but these are considerations that need to be made. We're in the middle of an information economy. We are starting to automate using these algorithms. These algorithms are being used more and more. In my business, I'm seeing a lot of use of these algorithms, and the big challenge is always the discussion is about are we making sure that the algorithms are processing or mining this data correctly and it doesn't have any sort of legal consequences or reputational damage could be done as a result of any wrong decisions being made. So those are all considerations that need to be made when we adopt the technology and of course trying to comply with the regulation.
Are you finding either people on your team or in your law firm are starting to embed into product development organizations or at least go-to-market teams? Because I don't understand how all that's going to really work. I mean, the real world of it working. I don't mean a spreadsheet after a product's launched and everyone runs around and kind of like make it look like you know what was really in the product, and then try to cover all the layers of it. But I mean, to understand the decisions that were made as, which when you build a product, it's 3 out of 4 things people want in a product don't actually go into a product, right? You run into those little brick walls or speed bumps because of time, resources, market feasibility, whatever. And having people on risk or legal, intimately involved there, it becomes to me almost kind of fundamental. The same way as you wouldn't build a product without a testing team. I don't see how you can build it without a risk legal team. Not just doing governance reviews 6 months later, pass fail. But I mean, so what's your experience in having your colleagues kind of get down to that, like the final 100 feet on the field?
It depends on the organization and also or the team lead, because I've seen, team leads call in legal right away, and say, all right, this is what I want to build. They give them a sketch from a legal perspective, and they say, call me again when you're at this point again. Because legal doesn't need to necessarily be sitting there at every step. They just need to be there at the beginning of the architecture, and then later on when it starts to manifest a little more. And then I've seen others who you don't find out about it until 2 years after and a problem arises, and they're calling in. You're getting a phone call from guys like Andre actually saying,
it has to be caught in the design phase. I mean, I'm a regular participant in my business, what we call readiness assessments, and it's trying to examine the decisions that are being made by the designers before it goes to production. Because you cannot have a product going to production or a service going to production that introduces additional risks into the environment. It's absolutely unacceptable. And it has to be a cultural thing. I mean, all organizations are the same, but it's an expectation in my line of business. And of course, financial services are very risk averse. There are multiple regulators that are looking at their operations, so they don't have a choice. So I guess when you're in a very heavily regulated environment, it almost comes like second nature. But I know that outside of in other industries, it's not as an accepted practice. But yeah, to answer your question, I definitely am a regular participant in those readiness assessments. And from an audit perspective, we have the authority to reject a product going to production if we see that the controls are not adequate enough to support its operation in a production environment. So for me, I guess my lens is probably a bit skewed because I'm accustomed to it. I know outside of that heavily regulated environment, that's not a normal practice.
Sorry, go ahead.
So when you start to look at the risk management side of the equation, and decisions are being made to go or no go, do you see that falling on a body that is basically looking at it from the perspective of business risk, technical risk, which don't necessarily equate to being the same? And as a result of that, the decision is actually made as opposed to some technical person saying, well, this is a risk that we can live with, it's a low risk, but in reality may actually translate to a high business risk. So how do you actually establish that linkage between the two? How do you maintain it? And how do you ensure that that is actually covered throughout the product life cycle?
So there are multiple stakeholders that are involved, right? Because each stakeholder brings their strengths and weaknesses. So we have compliance, we have legal, we have risk, separate and distinct and independent bodies. Still have the business there, and the business, of course, will have their rationale for wanting the product to go to market as quickly as possible because, of course, it's probably a revenue opportunity. You're trying to jump ahead of the competition that might have a similar solution that might need to be launched, obviously, ahead of the competition. But more importantly, the preservation of three important areas: operational risk, reputational risk, and compliance risk. So those are the three considerations that need to be put ahead of anything. So because we have these independent and separate and distinct entities that have the separate and distinct agendas, we find that kind of makes sure that the business that has the opportunity and has the product that needs to be launched don't get ahead of themselves and try to bring a product to production before it's ready. And so these teams can make final decisions and overrule the business to determine whether a product should go to market or not. And ultimately, the business will have to present a completely different solution or enhance the controls to ensure that the risk is mitigated or is reduced to some extent that makes it possible for it to be introduced into the environment and not introduce additional risk to the organization.
Any other final questions? If not, please join me one last time in thanking our panelists for their time today. Really appreciate it. Next up, we're going to have a few of our platinum sponsors say a few words, beginning, I believe, with Darktrace. So please welcome them up.
Hey there. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming by. First of all, thanks to MDS, one of our largest partners here in New York City. My name is Vinesh Vasnani. I'm with Darktrace. I'm a regional manager local to New York. Yeah, just wanted to give you guys kind of a quick background of Darktrace. It's been a couple of minutes here. So with Darktrace, what we are as a solution, we're playing in a brand new space of cybersecurity called anomaly detection software. We're the world's leading cyber AI company. Quick background on the company, we sprung out of the intelligence agencies over in the UK, MI5 GCHQ, and it simply put, those guys seeing what the challenge is today. The biggest challenge in cybersecurity is that the rate and sophistication of the attacker always outpaces legacy tools. Traditional approach for IT security has always been, let's try to keep the bad guy out. You build the idea of the 10-foot wall, bad guys show up the same day with the 11-foot ladder. Traditional tools, legacy approaches don't address the insider attack. They certainly don't address malicious activity from users within the network that have valid credentials. So our Intel guys knew that math was the answer. So they teamed up with machine learning specialists and double PhDs in mathematics. And they said, instead of trying to do the impossible of trying to keep the bad guy out, let's create a tool that's differentiated in the sense that it identifies the bad guys on T0 or T1 versus 180 days out, which is the typical number of days it takes to identify today's cyber attackers. So what Darktrace is, it's a software solution typically deployed through a hardware appliance, or it can be deployed fully in the cloud as well. And it's a software solution that plugs into your network, typically off of a core switch. We ingest raw network traffic data, PCAP information. We quickly understand, using the latest advances in unsupervised machine learning and mathematics, quickly understand how every user, every device, and the network as a whole normally operate. We baseline for about 7 to 10 days, and then we begin detecting subtle emerging threats or mathematical anomalies on the network. Our differentiator is that we're not based on any rules. No rules, no signatures, no agents. We don't need any prior knowledge of the network whatsoever. And we, simply put, we're looking at PCAP information, raw network traffic data, analyzing it by 350 plus dimensions of data in real time. And we're able to pick out all of the types of threats today that can circumvent your existing security tools, such as your firewall, your endpoint security, your SIM solution, your Nessus scanners, all the tools out there that are based on rules and signatures. Darktrace is very complementary to that. So what we call it is the enterprise immune system. It draws analogies to the human immune system, where everyone here in this room, we have an immune system, first of all, that has a deep understanding of self. When there's foreign bodies or abnormalities present, our bodies alert us of that. That's what Darktrace is doing today for our 1,000+ customers. Just a couple of quick real-world use cases that we have. I think Dauna on the panel had mentioned fax machines, and we're talking about the IoT devices that are out there. So we had a customer actually here in New Jersey. They essentially were a healthcare company, and they were part of a targeted attack where the bad guys got into their network via a fax machine. It was an IP-connected fax machine, and these hackers were then trying to pivot to their electronic medical record system. So they got into the network via the fax machine. Darktrace instantly picked it up and said, hey, this fax machine is making an anomalous amount of requests. You should probably look at this. Something strange is going on here. And of course, that security team saw instant value because they had 10 to 15 security tools, and they said Darktrace is the only tool without any manual configuration. We identified that anomaly in the network. So we know like IoT security is huge today. Gartner says there's going to be more than 10 billion connected devices, and those types of devices expand your surface area to be breached or to be attacked, and Darktrace has a lot of use cases around that. So yeah, that's kind of the quick overview. Would love for you guys to come say hi later on during refreshments. If there's any questions now, quickly that I could address, or great. If I did great, don't say anything. All right. Great. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks so much. Next up, we're going to have Microsoft say a few words. Welcome them.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for showing up to the security event. My name is Peter Ginniger, and I'm a cybersecurity specialist working for Microsoft. I work here in the tri-state region, And most of my customers are large commercial enterprise customers. So one thing I'd like to point out is with what we're seeing in general within the threat space today is a large number of these attacks. Almost every day I'm in front of customers and we're talking about either I'm pulled into conversations that have to deal with helping them because they were already attacked and breached. And a lot of the conversations that I like to have is, let's talk about how we can prevent these from happening. Unfortunately, nothing's 100%. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that the idea of just protection alone is not going to work, right? And we need to take this assume breach mindset today. And so it expands into not just protecting at the front door, but it's a protect, detect, and respond solution. And organizations need to have all of those three in place in order to be effective. And again, why is that? Because there's no protection out there that's 100%. Like my colleagues were saying before, you know, the attackers we're seeing today are more sophisticated. And the reason for that is because they're financially backed. It's an industry. From the attack perspective, it's an industry. They're getting paid money for these successful attacks. And what Microsoft has done is a few slides, and we can show you later, is, you know, there's an actual monetary price to each type of attack, whether it's an account, whether it's an email that was breached. And so from Microsoft's standpoint, we work with lots of partners, and we have our own security solution called Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite. We have a large cloud, which is Azure. We're heavily leveraging machine learning, which was mentioned before, and artificial intelligence to look at the data in a more rapid time than human response could deal with it, and to make decisions within milliseconds on how to protect. And so, you know, again, if you guys are interested in finding out more information on not only what Microsoft provides, but how we work with partners to integrate other solutions, just stop by the booth and be glad to talk to everyone. Other than that, thank you and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jason, for being a great moderator. So before we wrap up really shortly, I just wanted to thank our panelists one more time for taking the time out today to be here with us. A little something for each of them, if you guys don't mind coming up. Edward, Dauna, and Andre. Little gifts for you to thank you for your, and you guys will see these up there too. They're part of the raffle, so get excited. Thank you. And also, I'd like to thank our Platinum and Gold sponsors one more time. If one of those reps from each of them come up to get your little thank you gifts as well. We have Microsoft, one more time, come on down. Darktrace, Cisco, Sophos, Armor, and Zix. So this is where, right outside, you guys are going to be able to speak to them about any questions you have about what you heard today. Thank you. About any compliance, security, regulatory, data governance. And so we have that going on. There you go. I didn't tell them. So don't be shy. Come on down. I'm not going to bite. There you go. Thanks, guys. They're going to be here until around 6 o'clock. We have, as I said, the booth out there, and also around 4 o'clock, we're going to have drinks, cocktails, things like that. So you sure you want to stick around. We also have a raffle prize wheel where you can get prizes like these, and we have, and be sure to fill out your surveys as well, because we have a prize sponsored by Zix, a $50 gift card. One lucky winner will, from the Techxpo surveys, will be winning a $50 gift card. We'll do the drawing at the end of the event. So please do fill out your surveys, as that's how we continue to improve and get more events like these where we can help continuing to educate and continue the conversation. So thank you everyone for coming today.